Balatro is the latest indie darling to get a lot of success and has been making a lot of rounds as kind of like the next successful roguelike. And this has been going mainstream much like Hades did a few years ago. And having played the game on stream, and we'll probably do a separate review on it, it shows us some really smart lessons on roguelike design and some very important aspects you should learn with building your own. So you don't know what we're talking about. Balatro came out as kind of this poker, but not a poker roguelike, where you have a deck of 52 cards. Well, we all know aces, clubs, spades, and all that, but then you can throw in other cards, such as wild cards, credit cards, joker cards, and more that are there to kind of break the normal rules of the game. I was going to have some props here showing you my credit card and my social security card, but I kind of figured at the last minute that may not be the wisest move. And while this is poker, you're playing poker hands using poker terminology, it's actually a deck building roguelike. And it's a deck building roguelike that does a really good job of kind of exemplifying what makes this design work so well. And when we look at this game and deck building or rogueliking in general, it's again always about this idea of variance. How do I make things feel different and legitimately viable each and every time I play? And this can be done in many number of ways. Giving characters a variety of powers, having completely different runs, spells, options, and all that great stuff. But where a lot of roguelikes, especially deck building and those types, have oftentimes failed is when it comes to understanding the basic gameplay or getting someone to that point. So here's a description of how a run or builds could work in some roguelikes. Okay, this sword does 15 to 20 burn damage DPS, but also can do 3 to 5 fire damage. 3 to 5 fire damage causes a DOT that ticks at 1 every 3 seconds of damage. But if I get the artifact, the Fiery Goblet, that enhances all burn damage by 35% and increases the tick rate of all damage over time effects by 17%. Now, if an enemy has 80,000 points of health, and both trains leave Pennsylvania and Florida at the same time, at what point does Josh get to eat his dinner? It may have gone a little bit weird there, but I'm sure that's a valid question. And let me know the answer to that down below, but I only accept answers in the form of limericks or haikus. And this kind of complicated elements of roguelikes and that crunchiness, on one hand, it's what attracts people to these genres. We'll come back to this point in a second. This idea that you can combine all these different aspects, say a sword, this card, this artifact, and now I'm breaking the game. But when it's done in such an obscure or abstracted way, it's very hard to understand, what is my strategy? What am I trying to do to win? And this again comes up in a lot of the roguelikes and roguelikes that we've played, where, okay, I have air combo over here, but this is a bird, but apparently this is a grounded bird, so it doesn't get air bonuses, but it does get spiky bonuses, and spiky comes from green cards, and green cards are for limes. And again, we can just go down this list. And it's why we see from a lot of modernized games trying to streamline or simplify this idea. So instead of having to worry about all these different stats and values and equations, we just use tags. This sword has melee, slash, and sword tag. So if a spell, perk, buff, whatever, uses those 3 tags, that means it's good for you. And main games will, of course, like flash on the screen. Okay, this tag connects to this tag, so you should get them both together. And again, this is good UI and UX design about making this easy. But the problem is that when you remove the decision making of it, then you're kind of losing the point about what people want out of these games. People want to feel clever. They want to feel like they are one-upping the game in some way. Okay, so if I combine this wheel with this rolling pin. Now I do 80,000 points of damage. And every time I hit an enemy, the developer pays me 50 cents. And getting the player to understand this stuff, again, is both the joy and the nightmare of these games. And to bring this back to Balatro, the game does one thing incredibly well, and that is, again, use something that everyone understands. A deck of cards. And then they build the roguelike rules and the roguelike elements on top of that. So the secret about this game is that if you're really good at poker, you're really lucky, you get all the good hands, you're going to lose at this game. Because it's literally not possible, just by playing conventional poker, that you're going to win. And this was by the very design of it. They want you to break this game, and that, again, is at the heart of all roguelike and roguelite design. That you want the player to be figuring out how all these elements converge on each other, and then build a successful run accordingly. So with Balatro, when you play it, so I play some hands, I get a joker. So let's say this joker is times 15 multiplier for any hands with diamonds. Okay, so this gives me an idea. Well, this card boosts all my diamonds. Let me get more diamonds in my deck. If I get another joker that says, okay, now you'll gain an additional multiplier if the cards are even. Well, now I have two variables I won't be focused on with my deck strategy. And one of the things about Balatro that is indicative of all these games is that you win until you lose. And this is very apparent in any kind of deck building style game. If I build my deck around nothing but flying cards, and I come to a boss that, let's say, resists 75% of all flying, I'm kind of screwed, aren't I? And this, again, is one of the hardest points about these kinds of games, is trying to teach the player what you did right and what you did wrong. Because if you just rely on one singular strategy, then your entire game becomes about chasing that one strategy. And this is oftentimes a problem when it comes to educating someone on roguelike design. If on my very first run I get the super spear of stabbing, and it does 87 to 10,000 points of damage, and anytime I use spears it makes me get more health, and that sounds amazing, and then I still lose, or maybe I just barely win, I'm going to think that, well, that should be my only strategy. It worked so well the first time, why shouldn't it work the second, 5th, 30th, 80th, and so on time? And as a developer, you have to be able to spell to the player that, yes, this works. But there's all this over here that you can make use of. Maybe instead of spears, maybe it's clubs. Maybe it's fire magic, minions, poison, time slow, whatever. And Balatro does this really well. That you have this idea that the jokers are meant to be your build definers. Your 1 to 52 cards, of course, getting more or less as the run goes on, that stays constant. You know what a 2 of diamonds is. You know what a Queen of Spades is. But how these cards interact and how the jokers interact with each other is the major point about this. Being able to upgrade these cards, being able to, again, start building in your mind a plan. And again, this is a plan that's on a run-by-run basis. You do not want to have something in your game that is so good, that is so effective over everything else, that there is never a reason to try and do literally any other strategy. And again, if there is a perk, or if there is a card, or sword, or weapon, or whatever, that is so good that the player can't imagine playing the game without it, then you have messed up in terms of your design. So one of the things that I mentioned about with the likes of Dead Cells, and even going with something like Oblivion Override that we played, is that both games have this point where healing becomes a luxury. In Dead Cells, it happens as you go up the different kind of boss cell levels. In Oblivion's, it's the different alert levels. As enemies do more damage, it becomes harder to recover your health. If you reduce the number of ways a player can heal, then it becomes even harder. So, now of course, someone will mention, well, just don't get hit. And while that can certainly work for pro strats, for everyone else, they're going to take a hit or two. So anything that mitigates damage or provides more healing is automatically going to be a win. And if automatic healing is always a win, then it should be something you should get every single time. And again, if a strategy is so good that it single-handedly will win or provide the greatest chance of winning run after run, then you need to look at what's happening with your other builds, with your other ways of playing. And it's oftentimes this risk or this issue that a lot of roguelike developers run into, where one strategy gets really, really good, and then everything else doesn't. And then the developer thinks, well, the best thing to do then would be to nerf that really good strategy. But again, this is the nature of roguelike design. Roguelikes, by their nature, as we've said, are about variance. They're about procedural generation, random generation, RNG. If you nerf a really good strategy, there has to be something else to pick up that slack. And if there isn't, then people are not going to enjoy your game. You don't want to build a roguelike where there is one way of winning. That if you don't get these X cards, or this X gear, or this X perk, that your chance of winning is going to be slashed. And again, like I said, the problem when we talk about roguelike design, especially in these kinds of games, is how to understand difficulty. Someone who's really good at a game, they could probably be without all the best perks. They may be able to be with just a starting group of abilities and call it a day. But not everyone is like that. Not everyone has that same level of skill and ability. So this is why, again, when you're building a solid roguelike, you want to provide as many means of breaking the game. Sometimes the player will get 4 or 5 different individual game-breaking strategies that all combine to one super mega game-breaking strategy. And they're going to enjoy that. But again, it's not a case where, okay, every single run, I'm going to get this, and this, and the game is over. And with an interview that I did with Edmund McMillan about the Binding of Isaac, again, like part of that joy and part of the balancing you wanted to do was to say, screw it. I don't care if you combine a quad shot with a penta shot, with a tri shot, with a rapid fire shot, and then I just hit the attack button one time and the bullets just completely shut down the screen. Because it's these kinds of spikiness when it comes to builds, which is the other aspect of good roguelike design, and it's another aspect that Balatro gets really well. That every time you start getting like a really crazy combo, you can see over here that the light is, or like your little score is starting to set on fire. It's almost akin to when we hear Ode to Joy in Peggle. This idea that what you just did is doing something amazing, and it's going to pay off for you really well, so you want to keep doing that. And if you keep doing that, you'll keep getting better. And like we've said, there's a lot of subtle manipulation when it comes to any kind of game like this in terms of trying to guide the player towards these things. As a designer, you probably know all your best strategies. You know the best artifacts and the best cards. But getting the player to that point without just saying, okay, this card gives 10 billion damage to all green cards, so you should take all your green cards, case closed, is again notoriously difficult. And it's why we see, like I said earlier, this idea that you win until you lose. And this is kind of like the break-even or the major point for roguelike and roguelike design. When the player has that good run, they're beating the enemies, they're gradually getting power, and then they smack into that wall of a boss that just one-shots them. What are they going to do after that? A lot of people are just going to be like, well, there's nothing I could do. I quit. Game over. Refund. See you later. But you need to be able to try to educate the player as to maybe that boss smacked you down because All you did was build, again, llamas. And let's say this boss one-shots all llama class characters in the game. Being able to get this across to the player requires good GUI design, and again, a good UX. And with something like with Balatro, again, with the use of the jokers, with being able to see very cleanly, okay, this enhances this. This will get me points over here. This gets me more multiplier. So combining them will get me a lot of good stuff. And as I said, going back to the point about tags, a lot of developers like to use a tag-based system because, again, it's very apparent. Monster, human, vegetable. If this drum gives 75 points to all vegetable tags, then I want more vegetables in my army or in my deck. But when you make it too clean or too apparent like that, it removes, again, that joy of discovery. Instead of it just being very apparent like that, let's just say we have a watering can. The watering can provides health regeneration to all plant-based characters. And then I get the, farmer's hat. That whenever I wear this hat, whenever a plant-based character gains health, they gain 75% damage on top of that. And again, I can start connecting these separate dots together to create a plan. In an interview, I believe the developer of Balatro said that he was inspired, or they were inspired by stuff like Look Be a Landlord. And Look Be a Landlord and that kind of style of roguelike is very indicative of this. Now, the game is not spelling out completely, just take this, combine with this, put it over here, and you'll win every single time. It's about saying, okay, this is really good. This enhances the really good thing. This enhances the good thing with the really good thing. This enhances all really good things. So I combine this, 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 and this. I get a lot of really good things. And then lo and behold, now my run is really popping and I get all those numbers, get all the numbers in the world. So to wrap things up for our critical thought today, good roguelike design in this respect with Balatro is about streamlining the complicated side of a deck builder, of a roguelike, but still leaving the crunchiness, still leaving all these breadcrumbs that the player can follow to glory and chips and more cards and shinier jokers. So, if you want to know more about roguelike design as a shameless plug, you can pick up my book on it that's over there. And anyone who buys my book gets plus 10 to intelligence on all their runs. You may end up at like -3 resources, but I think that is certainly worth it. And again, if for those of you watching this, can you think of roguelike design or roguelike games that did a great job of making the complicated simple? Of providing the player with all these different strategies and tags and cards and artifacts and passives and whatever you want to call them, and make it very easy to grasp that this makes this powerful, which makes this powerful, which makes this become more powerful. As a final example, it was one of the things I really liked about Warriors of the Nile 2, that the entire game is about steamrolling. And that's a great point to end on. When you do your job right, it's about providing the player with multiple and viable ways of utterly and completely crushing everything that's in your game. And the player can do that and learn along the way, then you have an exciting game for them. That's going to do it for today's video. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to do the YouTubing stuff people tell you to do. If you're interested in more of my thoughts on design, check out my books wherever they are sold. Visit our Discord and Patreon, and come back for discussions on game design here, and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games.